Okay, there we go. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pan-African Community News Broadcast. My name is Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu. I'm in the studio with our sister, the lovely, I'm a little bit biased, Oleander Agbetu. Hopefully I can bring on screen. Sister Oleander, are you there?
Yes, greetings everyone. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's good to be back. Um, Yes, as you know, this is a news program where we share information on what's been taking place in our community from a Pan-African perspective. We are based in the UK, so it's kind of like news, views, and reviews for all that sort of stuff. We normally cover the last fortnight, but we've been away for around a month. I think it might even be a little bit longer because we were supposed to, or was hoping to come back last week, but I was away in Italy. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But we've got a jam-packed program for you as ever. I'm not sure what you're going to be doing right now if you're here watching, but if you're not, this is a pre-recorded thing that you can catch on Facebook and YouTube. I should say that you are free to share comments. It's always lovely to have your responses live. So if you have any comments, just giving us a mic check, letting us know that you can hear us okay, that you can see us okay. Put something in the chat and the wonderful sister Oleander will get back and share that with us. So I'm assuming that we're okay, that we're good to go. I'm going to just move on and start with the news story. And as ever, we always start the program with our libations, which we call We Remember. So the first slide is we remember to our sister Marcia Grant. Now, this is a really tragic story. She lost her life, joined the ancestors after being hit by her own car in the Green Hill area of Sheffield on the 5th of April. A young boy, but I think he's around 12 years old. We can't actually name him obviously because of his age, has actually been charged with murder and possessing a bladed article. Now, Marcia was much loved. She was a foster carer. Everyone said that she was a lovely, kind, generous woman. The council has paid a tribute to her. And they've said that not only did she provide endless love and care to vulnerable children when they needed it most, but she also shared her considerable time and experience to nurture and support fellow foster carers. So it's our libation to her, and we're saying we remember. The next libation is to a man by the name of Jashaka. Now, Jashaka, many of you will know, any of you who are in my generation age or around my generation age, is responsible for setting up a major sound system, also called Jashaka, in the 1970s. He came to the UK with his parents at the age of 8, settling in southeast London. And he rose to prominence, kind of not only just kind of like champion his music and dub sound, etc., but also using the music as a platform to address important issues such as inequality and social justice. His lyrics that he shared and he carried always provided hope, empowerment, unity. That was a core message of what he did. So Shajaka joined the ancestors and we remember. The next libation is for a colossal museum go by the name of Ahmad Jamal. Now, he joined the ancestors at the age of 92. I became familiar with his works probably over the last 10 years. And his works was so influential on so many different levels. He's a pianist. His keys were being sampled by people like De La Soul, Jay-Z, Common, Nas. So you've heard his works without even knowing that it's him. But I think what made him so amazing was that he was this brilliant improviser. He painted with his piano playing. He painted canvases, and just like the greatest of artists, he also understood the power of space, of letting space and letting music breathe. And so he developed a really amazing style. Now, one of the things that you'll hear quite a lot if you find out about him and decide to look into him is that he inspired many generations of musicians. One of the most famous being Miles Davis, who when he was forming his own new band and a new style, he was, crucially influenced by Jamal's early recordings, and he publicly states this. He's really clear about that. Now, Ahmad Jamal is a great loss to the world of music. It's quite interesting his career because for a long time he will say that he provided covers. I think the ratio he said something like he did 80% covers and 20% originals. But in 1958 he recorded this album called "But Not for Me," and it was a massive success. In fact, what he said in an interview not too long ago, I say not too long ago because I read it not too long ago, was that album paid his bills for 61 years. So even though he kept on producing afterwards, and I know him for things like Saturday Afternoon. I mean, he's just an amazing musician. He has influenced so many. I saw in one of the obituaries to him, there's a quote that was attributed to him, which I take to heart and I love, and it's really symbolic of him as a person. He says, "We don't create, we discover. And the process of discovery gives you energy." And that's him. That's who he was. This whole idea that there's a bit of ego involved in the industry, in the world, in the creative world. In general, we tend to always think that we are the new thing. We are the creative ones. We are the ones who are bringing something new and everything to the table. But I like this idea of him saying that actually what we're doing is discovering. We're discovering a new way, a different way, and it's that discovery that brings the energy. Submerge the ego, recognize that everything that's been done has been done. And when we're discovering new ways to perhaps express something that's ancient, something that's beautiful, that's primordial. So he was an amazing musician. And I'll leave that there. This is Ahmad Jamal, we remember. You are watching the Pan-African Community News Network. Remember, please, if you are online, that's on YouTube or Facebook, please feel free to share a comment to let us know that you can see and hear us okay. The recordings should stay afterwards. I'm pretty sure I've been told that they are present there, so you can still access them afterwards. But it's always nice for us to have the energy. Sister Oleander's there in the studio, waiting as well. If you have any comments you want to make or any questions you want to ask as well, or any libations you want to make, this is your program. Even though I'm sharing the news, it's your program. I'm just going through the We Remembers. And the next one is a man called Donald Hines. Now, Donald Hines was a writer, a teacher, a historian. And if you look at the image in the top of the screen, there's a copy of the cover of his book called Journey to an Illusion, which was published in 1966. And this provided an insight into the lives of post-war immigrants of African heritage to the UK. Now, before this book blew up and kind of like became a classic, he was really known as the fifth person of African heritage who became a bus driver. I think it was a bus conductor in the UK. Now, that's started on this path of kind of like being a trailblazer, but there's other things he did. In 1958, he met Claudia Jones. I don't know if you know Claudia Jones. I mean, if you've been following Legally for all the years, and you'd be very familiar with her amazing work. She was a Trinidadian political activist. She was exiled from the US for being a communist, and she was just an amazing woman, an amazing activist, and she mentored our brother Donald Hines. So he became a regular reporter for the West Indian Gazette newspaper that she ran, and so that was his, that's his thing. That's where he cut his teeth. That's where he got his writing skills. And, he used to write a column, and he used to write about the daily humiliations he experienced at work while he was a conductor, such as, a cleaner likened him to what people referred to as the gollywogs or the gollies on the Robertson jam jars. Now, we're probably all familiar with those of us of a certain generation. We remember those images and the iconography and the racism that came with it. So when he wrote this book, Journey to an Illusion, and he was talking about what the UK was like, the reality of it for someone coming from the Caribbean, he really touched home. He really made some poignant points that kind of demystified some of the fallacies that were going around. So he joined the Ancestors last month. This one is, I think we know the face, we know the image. This is Stephen Lawrence, who was murdered at the age of 18. And every year now, there is a Stephen Lawrence Day, which was introduced into the UK in 2018 by the then Prime Minister Theresa May as an opportunity to commemorate the lessons that hopefully have been learned, to celebrate his life of what could have been. Now, for those of you who aren't sure, who are new to the program, who are new to our history, Stephen was 18 when he was murdered. He was stabbed to death as he waited for a bus in Eltham, which is in southeast London. And this took place on April the 22nd in 1993, and it was a completely unprovoked attack by a gang of racist youths. Now, I can go through that situation, everything that happened, but that would take up the whole program. Suffice to say that two of the suspects, that's Gary Dobson and David Norris, were finally jailed for the murder in 2012. It took a very long time to get them convicted. It took even the rabid racist newspaper, the Daily Mail, to join in with the campaign to secure justice. Now, not everyone was convicted. Some of the gangs are still walking free. That's Jamie and Neil Acorn, their brothers, and Luke Knight. They were also named publicly as suspects, but they have never been convicted for the crime. Now, Stephen's father, Neville Lawrence, says that the Met Police surrendered to his son's killers, and he sent out this message across the UK that African life is cheap. Doreen Lawrence, Stephen's mother, has continued to campaign, and she's the one who kind of like leads the Stephen Lawrence Day and pushes it out there for people to be aware of, what he stood for, the idea of being, I think he wanted to be an architect. And the foundation, I think, provides bursaries and talks about these issues annually. It's really important to remember, because you're looking at the image and you're thinking, why is there an image of Tony Blair and Jack Straw on the screen? That's the image that you can see there. Well, it's because in 1997, when there was a Labour government, Tony Blair, actually, and he was a Prime Minister, Tony Blair opposed the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. Now, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry has been championed as the key instrument for introducing Britain to the words institutional racism. That's not actually true. That was done by Kwame Ture, who's known as Stokely Carmichael. He was the head of Black Panthers when he came to London. He's the one who coined the phrase institutional racism. Macpherson plagiarized it. But yes, but this report came out, and we've spoken about the Casey report recently, which has described the Metropolitan Police as institutionally racist, misogynist, and homophobic. But back then in 1997, before the inquiry was launched, Blair was one of those who actually said, no, maybe we shouldn't do this. But he did, to his credit. He did instruct them to focus on achievable goals, and he was quite clear that he wanted to make sure that whatever was inside the inquiry was still able to attract the support of the police. So this is perhaps an insight for some of you who look at inquiries as a way of securing justice, to understand how politics works. Politicians guide the chairs, they guide the people who are running these inquiries about what it is that they're expected to find. And even though there is a level of independence, they who feed kind of like decide exactly what's going to come out. So yeah, we remember Stephen Lawrence. The next we remember is actually a moment in history, actually. And I want to try and do this with every broadcast, at least something in history, just to kind of like give us the groundings, because what we need to do is remember that April, last month, actually, was the 42nd anniversary of a really important event in British African history, and that's the Brixton uprisings. And I say Brixton uprisings, even though they call them the riots. But on April the 11th, which was a day dubbed, the Bloody Sunday by the Time magazine, we had to remember that more than 300 people were injured, and the damage that was caused led to a cost of £7.5 million. And this was really done after we had faced, a ridiculous level of racism and abuse at the hands of the British state and the police, the Notting Hill fire massacre, and we just had enough. And so the uprisings took place. I could talk about the deaths in custody. But this is really just a primer for you to actually go out and do that research. But we need to remember the uprisings, because it's almost like they've put what's that drug, Novocaine. It's like they put Novocaine in our tea or something, because we see the placid. And no, before anyone said, I'm not another. Is that the energy? No, seriously not, because they have been just pissing on us. I think I'm saying, but they've been claiming Australia for a very, very long time now. And the fact that people want to be quite and find racist be free when I have two sons and daughter, who are big. I say big, they're still babies. The youngest is 18, and we're getting exactly the same outcome. Tells me that we have a lot of work to do, and I didn't expect to be here, to be honest with you. I expected that our generation, with access to more resources, with more knowledge about how the political system works, that we would have done better, that we would have seen changes. But no. The Brixton uprisings took place in 1981. More than 56 police vehicles were burnt. Almost 150 buildings were damaged, 30 of which were completely burnt out. And it's important to remember why. Another thing is that because there was another inquiry that took place at the time, the Scarman report, which was published in November 1981. And Scarman used this, he made this bizarre statement. I say bizarre because that's what it is to me. He made a statement that no doubt there is racial disadvantage in British life. I'm not saying that there's not, but the Met Police are clearly not institutionally racist. And this is kind of like what he was arguing, that it's not a part of the Metropolitan Police. And that's why the Macpherson report was so groundbreaking, because he pushed back against that narrative. But that's what took place 42 years ago. And I don't think anyone, if you're there listening, watching, can actually really put your hand on heart and say things have changed, substantially on an institutional level that makes our children safe and free from the abuse by the police that we faced as young people. In fact, back in those days, they were doing that to our elders. Grandparents were being stopped and searched under the sus laws. Yes. Let me go to the next. Okay, and so we remember this is one of my role models. I mean, often I talk about role models from the continent. I talk about role models from hold on.
Sorry, Toyin. Yeah, DM says learn another level of treachery to Tony Blair, like Keir Starmer soon.
Oh, thank you, Jim. I take it you're talking about the trying to nobble the inquiry. Yeah. Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes, and thank you for sharing your comments with us. It's good to know you're out there watching. Yeah, it was another level of treachery, and the Keir Starmer administration is following in those same footsteps. There's no evidence that they're going to be any different from the Blair administration. And I was one of those mugs that voted for Blair because we just wanted Tory out. So in fact, it's quite funny now, because after 13 years of Tory government, that clamour for anyone but the Tories is back, as we saw with the local election results. But what we should learn from history is that even with a Labour government, especially one as feckless as this one, it doesn't mean that we're going to have justice. In fact, what we're going to have is they will just squander hope. And perhaps I should do a program specifically about politics another day, because there is an opportunity for us now to work with independent political parties and smaller ones to actually put pressure, because I don't think there's going to be a landslide for Labour. I think it's going to be a hung parliament. But yes, I'll leave that there. That's another political discussion. So we remember Bernie Grant. He joined the Ancestors in April 2000. He was a member of Parliament for Tottenham, and he was just amazing. He was just, he was named the People's Champion. I think that was what they called him. He set up the African Reparations Movement, You can find out things. I think they're is it the Bishopsgate's archive, so you can find some of the things there. He used his power, his authority, his influence to speak up for those who were oppressed. And he didn't just focus on African people, even though that was clearly one of his major priorities. He focused on all people from all walks of life. Anyone who was oppressed, anyone who was being exploited by the state or let down by the state, he was a champion. And his mantle was taken over, his crown was taken over by David Lammy, who, as time has just shown, in all the years since, I think it's 23 years now since he took over that seat, that he's not worthy, that he is anything but, what Bernie Grant. I remember going to an event. Where was it? I think it was it War in the Babylon, or was it no, it was a community event. It wasn't in War in the Babylon, but it was talking about those issues. And a young person came up or something and said that, when in 2011 the uprisings took place there, Lammy was just nowhere to be found. And I remember in the media he was running our young people down for not speaking Queen's English. There's all these kind of things going on. But I don't want to pick on him. He does a great job for himself. I don't need to say anything. But Bernie Grant is someone we should remember. And that image you see there of him entering Houses of Parliament dressed fully in traditional African garb is a classic. There are many others. And of course, also, he was a friend of Jeremy Corbyn, who both of them actually were engaged in many, many struggles, local, national, and international, such as apartheid. And I just miss that caliber of integrity in politics. Another we remember, and the last one for this week, is the passing of the giant. And I say giant because, again, one of my role models, Harry Belafonte. Now, Harry Belafonte passed away at the age of 96, not too long ago. And, people think, well, why is he one of your role models? What was it? Well, Harry Belafonte is that remarkable example of someone who didn't have to be engaged, because he was, let's be honest, he was one of the first African-American superstars, for want of a better phrase. He was a singer with his Deo hit. He was an actor in Carmen Jones. He had it all. But he decided to engage in civil rights and later on human rights, like Malcolm did. And he used his platform in a way that I don't think I haven't really seen to this day. I mean, there's a few people who are close to it, but when I say he uses platform, to champion the people, I mean he uses platform and also his wealth. I mean, many people don't know that Harry Belafonte also funded the Freedom Riders in America during the Civil Rights Movement. He also bailed out Martin Luther King when he was in Burnham City Jail. In fact, more than that, Belafonte, our brother, he'd been privately providing funding for Martin Luther King for his family, because Martin Luther King had a salary of around $8,000 at the time. He couldn't afford to look after his family and do all the things that he was trying to do. So Harry Belafonte provided donations to keep him going. This is a remarkable human being who now joined the ancestors, who could have just sat back and do nothing and just bask in the glory of the fandom of people who loved his work. His European fans loved him. They said he was handsome, that he was charming. He didn't have to, but he made a conscious decision to get engaged. And it's something I find lacking in today's generation of artists. I find them, I don't get it. I mean, we hear about, there's little inklings. We hear people like Stormzy coming up and putting donations and putting in funds to get young people into Oxford and stuff. And there are those artists who do those little bits and pieces, but it's not enough. I remember when I was struggling, setting up Legali, and thankfully it was you, the community, that supported us. But none of the politicians, none of the artists put their money where their mouth is. None of them, not even quietly, did they support. When I was locked up in jail, none of them came to support. It was you, the community, that came to the police station and stopped me being a deaths in custody statistics. So when I think about Harry Belafonte and what we've lost with him becoming an ancestor, I'm glad that he made it to the age of 96. He's had what they say good innings, but we really lost a treasure, and there are others. I'm not being harsh. I don't mean to be harsh, but I'm just saying that often when you are seduced by the system, not many people can actually turn it down and say no. He did. In fact, he was around. I think he was 77 when he damned the President George W. Bush as the greatest terrorist in the world. I mean, he didn't pull back. He just called it as he saw it. So we remember you, our ancestor now, Harry Belafonte. Okay, so you are watching Pan African Community News Program. It's brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu here and Sister Oleander. Please feel free to share comments. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook. Always good to have you like. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's really helpful for us as well. YouTube is a very odd platform. And so what happens is that other Africans who are looking to find out about this information won't hear, it won't come up in their algorithms unless people do liking and subscribing and all that kind of nonsense. And I'm not very good at that. I don't have the energy to go out promoting our business. We just do it as it is. So I'm going to move on to the next section, which is really just looking at politics, again, through a Pan-African perspective. And surprise, surprise, I don't think any of you will be shocked when I say that the biggest story that's taken place in the UK over the last 24 hours is the one I don't really want to talk about, which is the coronation, that massive symbol of white supremacy. I put the headline up there: Coronation Ritual of British Monarch raises questions around ethics of participation. And that's because that's exactly what I believe it does. We have this bizarre scenario where you have people from our community who have taken a British Empire medal. And if you see the Empire medal, it literally says something about for God, for King, and for the British Empire. So you're wearing a model which is actually asking God to bless the empire. And you're going to this ritual, which is a bastion of white supremacy. You are cheering as they come out on the balcony, and the only woman of African heritage who is part of that family is being excluded because she's of African heritage. You have some parlor tricks where some stone of destiny is being bought, in some rituals to source some kind of demonic energy to maintain ill-gotten wealth for centuries. And you have African people doing spiritual Negroes, dancing and singing, clearly talented people, but clearly morally naive. I'll be courteous at an event that costs, is it £250 million? Is that right? I can't remember. It was 250. Yeah, 250 million, £250 million. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Sorry, the Sister Oleander. You say, yeah, well, it was 250 million.
Yeah, 250 million. And what gets me about that is people tell us how, but the monarchy brings in wealth. Yes, the monarchy brings in wealth in terms of in terms of tourism and so on. Yeah. But for one thing, London has always brought in wealth anyway. How much wealth did this actually bring in extra compared to what it normally does? And also the people who are just regular people of British citizenship, what do they get? They don't get any of this. In fact, we pay.
A party in the rain. Yeah, so I mean, yes, you're right. The argument is always that it stimulates the British economy. People coming in, all the local shops, the flights, the hotels, everyone gets paid a payday. But of course, not everyone gets a payday. The landed gentry get a payday. Those who own assets, who can exploit this scenario, get a payday. That £250 million could have established, I'd say food hubs could have established. It could have been, given as gifts to people who are behind on their rent. I mean, I don't even want to go and talk about what £250 million could have done, rather than shooting it all off on one day. And I was going to talk about the police and what they did, arresting people protesting before they'd even protest, and what that means about human rights. And we have this bizarre scenario now where the police are acting like magistrates. This is the whole Judge Dredd thing, right? Where the police are not following the law, but they're interpreting the law, and that's a really slippery slope. But you know what? Again, that's probably another discussion for another day. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on the House of Windsor. I think too much time has been spent on them. I do think as a community that we do need to talk about the ethics of participation. Which rituals should we boycott? Where do our ethics stand? I understand the idea of being able to showcase your talents on a global platform might be very seductive. I know how difficult it must be to say no when a monarch or the state offers you validation. But we have to have a grown-up discussion about the ethics of participation, because what I saw yesterday really was regressive. And I say what I saw, I didn't watch it. I caught it on the news. I refused to watch it. Okay, so moving on. Before that, next biggest story, I suppose, in the political world was that of Diane Abbott's suspension. Diane Abbott, you know, I mean, if you're watching this, you know who she is. First female of African heritage, into Parliament, blah, 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 stalwart politician. I mean, the long and short of it all, there was an article in the Observer, was it the Guardian? I can't remember which one it was. And it was stressing issues of racism. She decided to write in, and she made a really clumsy attempt at standing up for people of African heritage. And when I say clumsy attempt, the letter was just plain awful. And so she has been suspended. She's no longer a standing Labour MP, and there's going to be an investigation into her letter. In her letter, she had told the truth, actually. She had said that many Europeans are discriminated against, but don't face racism all their lives like we do. No truth detected, no lies detected. I mean, that's the very truth. When I say it was clumsy, she did do the silly thing where she brought in Roma people, she brought in Jewish people. She didn't need to kind of like go there, but she didn't say anything that was wrong. She just didn't articulate it well. And she wasn't invited to do this. It's really, it sounds like I have a lack of sympathy. Yeah, there's a bit of it. This is a bit of self-flagellation. She wasn't asked to comment. She did this to herself deliberately. She wrote this with a little bit of arrogance, thinking that she could address this without getting it checked by an academic or a scholar or an activist, and it just blew up in her face. Now, to her credit, she really quickly, after she realized what she'd done, she tweeted to say she was withdrawing her remarks. She was sincerely apologized. She didn't want to cause any anguish, and that was really good. And lo and behold, she did something that I'd never seen Diane do in a million years. She actually just shut the F up. Normally, she just does wrong and strong. She just goes on and on and on. It just makes things worse. But she actually just shut up, and that's absolutely the right thing for her to do, because she was right on principle, but she was wrong in execution. But despite that, despite the apology, you'd think that, first of all, someone in the Observer and the editor's team would have given her a heads up and said, Diane, you sure you want us to publish this? Because it's a bit, you know what I mean? No one had her back. You know, so you'd think that the media, recognizing that she is probably the politician in Parliament who receives the most racist abuse, would say, you know what, just give her a bly. She's apologized. She's been quick. She didn't drag her feet. Let's just leave it. You'd think they'd let her go, but no. Oh, no. You have people like Margaret Hodge saying, oh, her comments were deeply offensive, they're deeply distressing. You have idiots like Keir Starmer, no, they're wrong, and there's no space for a hierarchy of racism, same kind of nonsense they said about me. You have the board of, what they call the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and they described the comments as they were disgraceful, and her apology was completely unconvincing. And just to make things worse, and this is where it gets, and I know that I probably have a little bit of bias, but you also had Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, saying that the comments were simply unacceptable. And he says this while he's at a St. George's Day celebration in Trafalgar Square. And he reckons there's no place for this kind of comments in our society, or let alone the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has done the absolutely right thing by suspending Diane Abbott. Now, I'm going to try and not let my bias taint my comments, but none of those people who put their mouth on this face the same level of abuse as our sister does. And for all her sins, and she has many of them, she actually meant to do the right thing. She just did it badly. Her execution was just shoddy. It was Diane-esque, unfortunately. Now, where are we? Well, we have her being suspended. So, this is a dream to the Starmerites, who didn't want her in the party because of her close relationship. I mean, I think she was an ex-girlfriend of Corbyn. So they just didn't want her anywhere near them when they go for elections. They think that she's toxic, but I think they're toxic. And so they can drag out this investigation into a comment, and it'll probably go on for months and months. If they could drag it out for a year so that she can't actually stand, or they can get someone else to replace her, they would actually do it. So we need to keep watching the space. And, we do need to have her back. I know she could be a right pain in the butt, and she is at times, but she is doing it from the right place. And she, like I said, no lies detected. Just
do you mean she's doing it from the right place?
Yeah, isn't that what I said?
You said from the wrong place.
Oh, sorry, she's doing it from the right place. And I don't mean the right-wing place. She's doing it from the socialist left place. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Thank you for the correction. I'm going to move on because I don't really... Labour politics just does my head in. So let's go on to... We're talking about the royal family. The next story is, a water is wet moment. So I don't know if you know, there was I forgot her name, something, Brooke Newman, I think her name is, someone who's doing some research into slavery in the royal family and accessed their archives and going through it. And they found out that there was a transfer of £1,000 in shares to the royal monarch at the time. That's King William III or something. And this came from Edward Colston, who was the governor of the Royal African Company, and that's the British slave and enterprise, the Arthur criminal enterprise, as we should really refer to it. Now, the Guardian published an article exposing this and shared the letter, which is quite good. It's an unseen document, so it really confirms what we already know. But that's the point, isn't it? Right? Is there anyone who didn't know that a royal family was involved in the enslavement of our ancestors and profited from it? I mean, it was called the Royal African Company. I mean, we know this, but it is a smoking gun for those who need smoking guns. And it did start the debate again, which is a good thing. The discussion is up again. And as people in the so-called Commonwealth, that perverse title that describes nations that are tied economically and politically to British whims and fads, they are now starting to think perhaps we need to come out of this. I mean, this is a really bizarre thing. I'm sorry about this, the slight aside from the story. It's like what people don't recognize is that what we saw, or what happened yesterday, wasn't just Charles becoming the King of England. People witnessed him becoming the King of Jamaica. He was the King of Canada. The King of, I mean, I can go through all the Commonwealth nations. That's what they witnessed. They took part, the people who were singing and dancing took part in a ritual that made Charles the King of Jamaica. Let me put it in those terms. Do you get it? That's the foolishness that we're signing off on. So anyway, back to this story. So Buckingham Palace heard about the document, issued a statement that they're willing to enable a researcher to have access to their documents, and because Charles apparently cares about these kind of things, and blah, 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 blah. That's the story, basically. Water is wet story, that kind of thing. In other news, we have what's his name, Justin Webley, from the Church of England, defending that the Church of England is going to spend £100 million to fund projects to address its past links to African enslavement. But he's been really clear. Look, this is not anything to do with post-colonial guilt. This is about the presence of the risen Christ alive in the church. That's what we're doing. It's got nothing to do with reparations. It's got nothing to do with us feeling guilty. This is Christ risen. And so that's why we're spending this £100 million. And similarly, we have the University of Edinburgh not being so anal about Christ and all this stuff. They're saying that, look, we're producing this race review. We're going to make a series of evidence-based recommendations by the end of 2024, and then we're going to implement them. We'll see if they do so. But that's the position on this. So again, this is another thing that we could spend a lot of time talking about. But yeah, it's enough of House of Windsor nonsense. Next story, related to this, but again, it's a reminder of where we are, the country, and the hot ghetto mess that calls itself its government. Rishi Sunak, who is the Prime Minister, has refused to apologise for the UK's role in slavery. The papers say slavery. I say Ma'afa because it's not just slavery; it's also colonialism. They keep cutting the two off and playing us against each other. You know, like those of us from diasporic heritage and those with us direct continental heritage, as if they're not the same issue, they're not the same crime. But anyway, he's come out and said that he's not going to do it. It's really, really interesting because this was raised in Parliament, in the House of Commons, by our sister Belle Ribeiro Ade, and she invoked Bernie Grant. She reminded Sunak that, you know, before Bernie passed away 23 years ago, he actually asked the government for an apology. That's when he was talking to Tony Blair, and she was making the point that we keep getting these statements of regret, but that's not a full apology. And Sunak responded by saying, look, trying to unpick our history is not the right way forward, and it's not something that we will focus our energies on. I mean, he's just solidarity between ethnic minorities, right? Yeah. So this is it. So that's what he says. He's not going to do anything about it. It's just an irritating statement. It's not unsurprising. But we do need to remember that as much as we have some, you know, brilliant sisters in the party, the Labour Party, like Bell, we have its leadership right now captured by a cabal which involves people like Lammy, and that image of the crown and cake is his article he wrote for a US magazine where he bigs up the monarchy. You know, he talks about his pride, talks about how he will pledge allegiance to the king on question time. It's really interesting that he says that, because what happened was that the Buckingham Palace saw that the public was so against this idea of having to swear allegiance to the monarchy, they dropped the requirement to actually ask the public to make a pledge. But Lammy already did it in public anyway. He already wrote it inside that article, which he wrote for I think it was at the New York Times or something like that. In fact, that article is quite cringeworthy. Not only does he prostrate before his white supremacist masters, but even when he's talking about the history of enslavement, he can't even mention slavery. You know what he does? He talks about plantation economy. That's his euphemism for talking about slavery and colonialism. But let's not get personal. That's what's going on there. What I was going to go to is just to remind us that in its 2019 manifesto, that Labour planned to teach everyone, children, you know, at all levels, about injustice and the role of the British Empire as part of the national curriculum. But what we now know is that Starmer, Lammy, and other MPs seem to have dropped this pledge. They're just not interested. And so that's the situation that we have with that particular story. I'm going to get to the next slide. And it looks like it's Slavery Week this week, because this story you might have heard about, and this is the councillor, the Conservative councillor, who was caught making some really Afrophobic statements. His name is Andrew Edwards. He said, and to quote his words exactly, "I think all white men should have a black man as a slave or a black woman as a slave, you know. It's nothing with skin colour. It's just that they're a lower class than us white people, you know." That's his words, exact words. Well, the good news is they're finally suspended him. It took them long enough. So they decided that actually maybe this won't help our election campaigns. So let's suspend him, and then when things quiet down, we'll bring him back. The Welsh Conservative leader, he's based in Cymru, said that the views expressed in the recording are disgraceful, blah, 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 they're abhorrent, blah, 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 not shared by Welsh Conservatives, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, right, whatever. We know they are. That's the situation. And this is part of the problem about the illusion of inclusion, where we're seeing all kinds of people in British politics who are no longer got direct Eurocentric heritage or European heritage. They're coming from Asia, they come from Africa, they come from all over. But actually, it makes no difference. You know, they're just like wallpaper. I think the term in activist circles is art washing, but in this case, I don't know what you call it, black washing. I don't know what you'd call this. It's like, you know, it's just ugh. Anyway, let me move on to the next story. And let's talk about how it could be done. So this feedback, I did come back with a cold from Italy. So you hear me sniffing and blowing my noses about that. I'm sorry. Yeah, what was I saying? Ah, that's right. So Brazil finally elected.
Sorry, Toyin, there's another message.
Ah, cool.
And it's from DM again saying, not forget Lammy stole the PPC from Bernie Grant's widow. Not surprised, no change since.
The PPC, I'm not sure what PPC is. When you say the PPC, I'm not, it'll be good to have some, that's what I love about us talking live, like you learn something every day. If you can share a little bit more information, that would be great.
Yeah.
Because I do like to keep up to date with what's happening even on local levels. Tottenham's just down the road from me. But while we're chatting, thank you, Matthew. So Brazil, recently elected, what do you call it?
Sorry, Toyin.
No apology needed.
He says MP selection.
MP selection. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how. Oh, right. So does that mean that
for prospective candidates?
Right, PP. Got it. So does that mean that Sharon was going to run and then Lammy took it? I didn't. I'll look into. Thank you for sharing that. I'll have a quick look into that. But to be honest with you, nothing surprises me with that one there. Nothing surprises me. Nothing. Let me not go there. He's a great orator and he's useful for us when he's out of power. But when that guy's back in power, Tottenham had better be careful because he is as, Thank you. So I'm going to go back to this story about Brazil. And Brazil elected in Lula. And Lula is an amazing socialist politician. The right, which was, I've forgotten that guy's name. Oh, God, I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. He was a Trump supporter, Bolsonaro. He was a crazy guy, a really toxic politician. So it's great that Brazil has, a socialist government. And one of the things they've done, and let's just give an example about kind of like how things can be done, was that like last week, he abolished a human rights medal that was named after the daughter of the country's last monarch. And he's replaced it with the name of Luiz Gama, who was an amazing abolitionist pioneer, an orator, journalist, and writer in the 19th century. And so instead of the medal being called after someone who actually endorsed and benefited from enslavement, it's actually now named after someone who's actually a symbol for freedom. And this is what can be done. Rather than having a medal called the OBE, the MBE, the BEM. So these are all the British Empire, member of the British Empire and British Empire medal. They could be named after people in the UK who have actually done great liberation work. The Laudo Lacriana medal, the Bernie Grant medal. They could be named after some, if people need that, or even just liberatory model, just something like a medal. I mean, you can see in Brazil, they take this serious. They've even named streets after other. So I just wanted to share an international perspective. It doesn't always have to be this way. The way that we see it in the UK, where people preserve this toxic tradition, can change. If Labour government was to get into power, they could change it if they wanted to. The problem is they're not going to. That's the problem, because they have no vision, they have no morals, they have no integrity, no ethics. But it can be done. The next story is about BEO. This is the Black Equity Organisation, who are going to launch a judicial review against the Home Office on its decision to renege on Windrush recommendations. And this is really on the heels of the statement made in January by Suella Braverman, where she said that she's not going to implement two of the recommendations from Wendy Williams' review that would have increased independent scrutiny of the Home Office policies on immigration, and it's promised to run reconciliation events with Windrush families. And we spoke about this before on this program, so you're probably familiar with this. But the Black Equity Organisation, I wish they'd change that name, that black. We kind of need to grow up a little bit. But they're going to, or I think they did launch a petition with around 50,000 signatories, and they're urging Braverman to reconsider this decision. It's important to get the context of this because you may not realise that it was actually in 2018, that's 5 years ago now, when the then Prime Minister Theresa May apologised for the scandal. I think Amber Rudd, who was Kwame Kwarteng's ex-girlfriend, resigned because she was the architect of the policies that ran it. And in those 5 years, you would have thought there'd been justice, but no. Last month in February 2023, Human Rights Watch interviewed over a dozen people, and they found that actually the scheme is unfit for purpose. That people who are Windrush scandal survivors and some who have passed away, the families of those who are affected by it, have still not got compensation or are still being run through hoops. And so it's quite disgusting. And I say all this on recognising that we're moving towards that ridiculous idea, what they call it Windrush Day, where the government is now using the Windrush name to reclaim the fight on the name. So we forget about the Windrush scandal and we start talking about the Windrush Day. We start celebrating the boat, the Windrush. Or so I should say boat. Actually, let me be clear. The full name of the boat, if I'm incorrectly, is SS Empire Windrush. That is the name of the boat. When we talk about Windrush, we should really just say SS Empire Windrush. But of course, it's not convenient to remember that was also part of the empire. That whole ethos, that whole everything about that was about enriching the empire with our labour, with our with everything from us, our blood, our soil. Anyway, let's hope that the Black Equity Organisation is successful in this campaign. Judicial reviews are notoriously difficult to win, and I know. Okay, last story in this section is about a report that was conducted over 2 years, which has concluded that Britain is not close to being a racially just society. And this was led by Professor Nisa Finney at the University of St Andrews, who said it showed that racism was part of the daily lives of people from ethnic minority communities. Pretty much what Diane Abbott was saying, but obviously Diane Abbott's not an academic, so an academic can get away with it because they can use language in a certain way, and Diane Abbott can be vilified by racist mainstream media and a feckless political leader who wanted to kick her out of the party from day one. So, I mean, this report, it's a what is wet report. Is that more than a third of people from ethnic minority and religious minorities have experienced racial motivated physical or verbal abuse. That's one of the down things there. They found that across all British institutions, there's racism, there's evidence of discrimination and unfairness. The report completely challenges the Sewell report on racial disparities that was published a couple of years ago. And it actually goes as far as accusing it of downplaying the existence and the impact of structural racism in the UK. So this is quite good. At least you've got another academic paper pushing back against that toilet roll, which was published by the government, which still isn't fit enough to wipe away a number two. So water is wet. Britain is not close to being a racially just society. Okay, so the next section is UK policing matters. Excuse me. Just as a heads up, and this is a reminder, you are on the Pan-African Community News Programme. We've got quite a lot to go through because we've been away for, we normally do 2 weeks, but I think we've been away for just over 4 weeks. I'm trying to cover a lot of stuff. Can't cover everything, it's impossible, and I'm tired, and I'm still recovering from the lurgies. But it's good to be here. It's good to have you with us. Remember, you can drop in the chat like a wonderful DM is. That's on YouTube or Facebook, and let us know that that you are well. We know that you can hear us now, which is great, and you can see us. But let us know if you've got any comments, something you want to share, or something you want to ask as well, or even a libation. That's what we're here. It's your channel, it's your program. That's it. So I'm going to go through what we call UK policing matters now, and yeah, I'll start with the first story, which is that which has been bubbling up for quite a while, and that's of the ex-BBC and Capital FM DJ Tim Westwood, who is now finally, at long last, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I should have muted the mic. Actually, I'll mute the mic once. Okay, hopefully I muted the mic so you couldn't hear that. Right, okay. I'm at that phase, you know, where the lurgies kick in. So all the lurgies have gone, you know, the fever's gone, but I'm left now with all the phlegm, which is really irritating. Tim Westwood is actually being interviewed under caution. Now, for those of you who haven't been following the story with us, he's being questioned twice now under caution over 5 alleged sex offences. Now, he has been involved in the hip hop scene in the UK for some 40 years. That's Westwood. I mean, when I started out making music in the industry, he was around. And he has pushed his way through, bullied his way through. And I say bullied, you know, because I know people who feel bullied by him. He had so much power given to him by the BBC. I know he moved to Capital, but it was really the BBC. I mean, he was on a Beggar's Banquet. I remember it was a label Ricky used to run, but the BBC is where he took that power, and he started to be able to dominate and control the careers of artists, British artists, who he had disdained for. But now, these complaints, these allegations made by women in the industry have said that he has been abusing his position in the music industry. Some of the women say that they encountered him when they were under 18, and one of the women accusing him said that she was only 14 when he first had sex with her. So these are some serious allegations, and there is a documentary on the BBC website called Tim Westwood Abuse of Power. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, and I think that some of those women who allege that they've been abused by him share their points of view. Now, of course, Westwood denies all this, and the police said that they are investigating crimes that have occurred between 1982 and 2016. That's the only window that they're looking at, but that's still several decades. You know, it's an outrageous situation, and I mean, people think, well, at least now people are looking at him and looking at what's going on. But my issue is really that he has, even if they find him guilty, and there's no guarantee of that, he has run roughshod over the industry for decades. That power has been in the hands of this man, and because of the power that was given to him by the institution, he's been able to cause so much harm for so long. And I am not convinced that there are not others behind him who are in similar positions. And I say this, and I'm going to move on to the next story because I know I can hear myself rambling. Is because I think the BBC, for all the good that it used to be able to do, and it did do some really good stuff, it has this horrible habit of amplifying some of the most toxic, racist people in society. So people like David Starkey was a BBC darling. People like Kilroy Silk was a BBC darling. People like Tim Westwood, you know, people like Jeremy Clarkson, and they stay on that platform on BBC. We pay for it. It comes out of our money, with their disgusting Afrophobic views, with their abusive habits and behaviour, and they cause havoc with impunity. And then 20, 30 years later, they get cancelled. And I just think we need to move away from that kind of like way of allowing things to happen, and that we deal with it much sooner. But that's another topic for another day. The next story is one that's probably not going to surprise you, and that is African children are 11 times more likely to be strip searched in England and Wales than their European peers. I don't even know I need to say much on this, other than that there's been a recent official report that says that the widespread abuse of the power to strip search children by the police has been abused. The report says that 38% of children strip searched were of African heritage. It's completely disproportionate. African girls were 3 times more likely to undergo invasive strip search by the Metropolitan Police. That's another report along similar lines around the same time. The Children's Commissioner study on the same theme found that the police did not follow the rules in more than half of strip searches, which amount to a widespread non-compliance. And also on top of that, in half of all the searches, nothing was found. So you need to understand is that not only are our children 11 times more likely to be strip searched, and they are being strip searched, but when they are strip searched, that half of them are completely innocent of anything. You know, there's no grounds. You know, we know the Child Q story where she was strip searched in school premises on the basis of smelling of a drug that she didn't have on her. So this is an ongoing story. I'll put statistics on the screen, but it's another water is wet report. You know, we've got to keep working on this. I say that, and I should have put an image up as well. One of the reasons I was in Italy is because, and I want to give a massive big up here publicly to Hackney Account, because I was working with a Hackney Account, did a project with them through UCL engagement, and the amazing Alicia at Goldsmith, who are working with a fantastic group called Arcia Media in Italy. And what's happening now is that those two groups, the Hackney Youth Group and the Italian Youth Group that deals with this issue of racialized policing, they're now sharing information and supporting each other. So I'm going to keep working on that project. So if you don't see me, sometimes it's because I'm doing other work, which I can't always talk about, but I'm trying to use the resources of the Academy as well to amplify their voices. That was actually the name of the event, the conference that we did, Amplified Voices. But it was last week, listening to what our counterparts, the young people, are going through in Italy, broke my heart. I mean, perhaps I should do another thing about this. I mean, you know, we have it bad, but in Italy, what happens there, just so you know, is the police don't actually need any grounds to stop and search you. So if they stop you, they can ask, no, let's be clear, they stop you, they can demand your ID, so you must have your ID and you must have evidence of where you live. If you don't, then that's when it gets serious. They start searching you, take you to a police station, and then, you know, it goes to the judges quite quickly if you know, who can authorize things, and it gets really pear-shaped. And so anyone who is, you know, who is of a minority ethnic background, essentially anyone of African heritage and of Asian heritage, anyone who doesn't look Eurocentric, excuse me, anyone else is at risk of abuse. And this is what happens. I'm rambling again, I can hear myself, so I'll shut up now. But yeah, just a big
I was just going to say, it reminds me of apartheid.
Yeah,
you know, exactly, yeah. That's what it's just terrible.
Well, that's it. I mean, while I was there, we had to have, you know, all of us from the UK, we had to carry our passports. We had to carry the name of the place that we were staying at, because if we'd been caught, you know, on the street and we'd been stopped and we didn't have it, then all of a sudden we get washed up in some kind of like fascist type procedure. Thankfully, we didn't have any bad experiences, and had a really good, you know, a good time there, in a sense that it was lovely meeting other people doing similar work. The day that we got there was a massive protest in Rome about racism. It's really interesting to see what's going on across Europe dealing with this issue that isn't reported in the UK whatsoever. You would have no idea that there are many people from our community, and I say, you know, I'm talking about as a Pan-Africanist now, all over the world, fighting the struggle on a daily basis. Sometimes massive turnouts, massive conflicts, like France right now in France, where you're having these massive protests about pensions and stuff. And, you know, we don't see it on the news. We barely get coverage about what's taking place in Sudan. But yeah, thank you for the comment. And I can hear myself rambling. You're right. It is pretty much like the past papers in Zania. I'll move on to the next story. I labeled this one Mental Health Watch because I'm really tempted to create a section in the program called Mental Health. I don't know if we want another program or, you know, find someone who can report back on this, because the stigma that comes with mental health and the dangers that we face as African people in the UK when we have mental health are real, they're tangible. So this story kind of like came on very quickly, but because this is a review over the last few weeks, I'm covering it. And this is a story about an inquest that's begun after a man had fell to his death after a Metropolitan police officer shot him with a taser. Now the backdrop, or the story to this is that the police have been called to a block of flats in Peckham after there were reports that he was threatening to jump to kill himself. He clearly was in crisis. He clearly had a problem. Something went really wrong. The Met statement reads, the man was tasered while on the balcony and fell several floors to the ground. The man was transported to hospital with life-threatening injuries and then died later the same day. And we don't have any more information. We know that the man is, it was like a 90% chance that he's of African heritage. I think the police have said that, but they're kind of like being cagey about the details on that. We also know that in 2021 report by the IOPC, it showed that of the 19 people who died in or following police custody, 12 of them had mental health concerns. 12 out of 19. So there's something that we're not talking about. It's not just about police violence. There's something about the vulnerability of people being ignored or ramped up into aggressive action against them. The image that's in the backdrop of this slide is that of Sean Rigg. Sean Rigg was a musician. He was 4 years of age, who was killed in police custody in Brixton in August 2008. This is a long, ongoing story. I'm not going to read off a whole list of names of people who have passed away while in custody, suffering from mental health concerns while they're in crisis. But something rotten in the system is still there. It's not being resolved, and it's something. I think with mental health, I think we as a community have to also really step up to the plate and recognise that as uncomfortable it is to have this discussion about mental health. I mean, this guy in the story was threatening to jump, right, to take his own life. He had suicide ideation. But we need to help people who are struggling with mental health. And the police certainly shouldn't be going there and tasering them. I don't know what happened, so I can't really make comments on that particular incident. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what information is shared. I'll move on to the next story. And it is related, even though this section is looking at general news. And this is a Pan-African program, so sorry. Even though we cover news from a UK perspective, it doesn't mean that we don't look at what's taking place internationally and how that affects us. And I do apologise, I don't have anything about slides about what's taking place in Sudan, because that's something that's really in my head at the moment. And our inability to do anything about it is also problematic. The fact that Suella Braverman has come out and said that she's not going to prepare any safe routes for people trying to flee for safety is bugging me. I know there's a protest. Someone asked me to talk at a protest. I think it's on Tuesday. It's going to go to the Home Office and then to the embassy. I don't do public speaking anymore at these events, but I have said I'll try to attend. I'll just jump on my bike and go up there and just be there in solidarity. We are stretched all over, fighting many, many different fights. But I wanted to share this following story, which is the one that I don't know why it hurt, but they all hurt. But when I saw this, I was unprepared. Maybe it's sometimes because when I'm reading these things, I get them on that toxic platform called Twitter. And it catches me when I'm normally just kind of like in the morning, just quickly scanning through things to see if anything's happened. It's kind of like my quick news digest. And thankfully, I haven't watched the video. Someone advised me don't, because it wouldn't mess with me. These things stay with me for quite a long time when I watch them. But I don't know if you heard the story of Jordan Neely in New York. He was a man, he got on a train and he was in crisis. He was upset. He was ranting and shouting. saying that he doesn't care if he goes to prison. He's homeless. He'd prefer to be in prison. I think at least they feed him, that kind of stuff. He threw his jacket, took his jacket off, threw it on the ground. And him throwing his jacket on the ground, he didn't threaten anyone. It needs to be really clear. He didn't threaten anyone. Him throwing his jacket on the ground seemed to be the prompt for a former US Marine called Daniel Penny to get up, jump up, and then put a chokehold around him and engage in that ritual which the police play called positional asphyxia, where they hold someone, compress their neck until they choke to death. And that's what he did. Daniel Perry killed our brother, Jordan Neely. It was filmed. Someone took out their phone and filmed it, didn't intervene. People were saying, you're going to kill him, you're going to kill him, but he kept on doing it anyway for several minutes. And then after that, I think the police kind of like spoke to this former Marine and let him go. It's kind of like what Neville Lawrence was saying. They keep sending this message that our lives are worthless. They let him go. Coroner's reports come in, and we know that Jordan was killed. He died from compression to his neck. There's no doubt that he was killed, that this guy murdered him. None whatsoever. The evidence is there. There's witnesses. There's footage, but he's not being prosecuted. And instead, the mainstream media has gone around and started sending stories about how he'd been, like Jordan had been involved with the police. He was out for arrest for assault and misdemeanors, all these different things. He was homeless, and they're just done this character assassination on him. I mean, we're used to it, right? We see this happening all the time. But it doesn't make us numb to it, or it doesn't make me numb to it. Every time it happens, it hurts in a way that I just can't explain. He was homeless. He was vulnerable. He was in crisis. He didn't threaten anyone. He was loud. He was leery. He was being obnoxious. I mean, there's footage now of him going around apparently making homophobic comments in public, and people are using that to say, well, he wasn't a nice person, so he died. There are people justifying this kind of lynching in public, and I can't get over the fact that this guy Daniel Penny is walking free. He's not even facing charges of manslaughter. I mean, is that where we are now? You can kill an African, and if the media can do a good enough hatchet job on their character, so like they did it on me, for example, so he's a radical, he disrupted this, and he did this, so what, he's dead. That's okay. You don't even get a day in court. You don't even get to test the facts. You don't even. So anyway, I mean, I saw this morning there have been protests. There are people standing on tracks in New York, the train lines, to stop it, disrupt, and trying to get the push to get the prosecutor to make this into a case. I don't know what's going to happen. I've read a story about our brother Jordan and his backstory. His backstory is horrific. His mother was murdered in 2007. I think he was 16. And he has never, ever been the same. His family says he's suffered from demons ever since that. I think she was murdered by an ex-partner. He just didn't recover from it. Anyway, Mental Health Watch. It's outside the scope of this program to deal with mental health, and I'm not an expert on mental health. I have friends who are caught up in the wrong way in the system, who are, who are being medicated. I have some who are sectioned. I have friends who have family who have been killed during mental health crisis. It's too big for this program. It's too big. I don't even have, even as an activist, I can only support others dealing with that, but I just can't do it all. But we as a community need to have a discussion about mental health, because this is what I think is going to become a bigger problem as time goes by. As Cosy lives, the cost of living increases and things get worse and worse and worse, and the pressures come on us, and these governments get more extreme. And I'm talking about the British government here, whether it's Labour, whether it's Conservative, doesn't make no difference. We're going to suffer from more mental health challenges, and the police can just go around tasering us, and when we're threatening to kill our lives and end up killing us anyway. If members of the public, can just kill us with impunity, We need to have a plan to protect ourselves from that. So I took so long on that story. It gets to me. I don't think we talk about mental health enough. The next story really is related in many ways, because I talked about the role of the media, and the media validates this. The media does this mad or bad thing really quickly. So if it's someone that they sympathise with, then they have mental health issues, and that's why they massacred a whole school. And so it's the mad argument. If it's someone from our community, oh, they're bad people, they've had a history of crime, rah, 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 they need a death penalty, so it's the mad or bad thing, and the media gets involved in that. And the reason why the media gets involved in that is because it's rife with racism. And this report by the Ethical Journalism Network has shown that racism is rife in the UK media. We know this. You just need to look at the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Times, the Sun. I mean, they're consistently the Jewish Chronicles, all of them. The Spectator, all of them. They're just awful. Let alone the broadcast like GB News and now BBC with some of its its biased political output. So, I mean, this report has come back and said that we need more senior African staff across the industry. The report was funded by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. It says that, or there was a study in 2015 that says that European journalists comprise 94% of the whole workforce when it comes to the media, when it comes to journalism. 94%. And that's African journalists, account for just 0.2% of all staff members. So this is a pattern that's replicated not just across the media, but also in higher education, in policing, anywhere where it counts. But in the media, where they shape the minds of the people, where they influence whether someone's prosecuted, whether there's public sympathy, empathy, or derision and toxicity, we need to be involved in the media. Next story is one that I recently just heard of, and what can you do? A 93-year-old woman, one of our elders, has been stuck in her room for months simply because the lift has been broken, and the landlord just wouldn't fix it. They're all passing the buck about who's responsible for it. Now, her daughter has said that it's been outrageous because of their failure to fix it. She was isolated since last year. She missed her her church activities for Christmas, the shopping trip to Wandsworth. She can't go down the road to the shop. She can't go to her Silver Socials Club. These are vulnerable people. I say we're paying taxes, but it seems to make no difference. We might as well not pay taxes. Might as well. Anyway, the council, I think, has said now that it's going to. This is in Clapham Common, by the way. So she lives in a 4th-floor supported housing unit. That's the picture you can see in the backdrop. So the landlord has now said, okay, we're going to modernise the whole lifting, and we're going to repair it and fix it, so it won't be a problem anymore. So that's what's apparently taking place. So I had to keep an eye on that story as well and see that it gets resolved, and just hope that she is able to move around and go shopping and socialise, because at that age you can't be bound in one place. I have a couple of neighbours who are. I've known them for like over 30 years, and they can't leave the house because their health, and they just want to talk. They just want to socialise. They need to talk. Once they start to lose it, they start to feel worthless. And when you start to feel worthless in yourself, then you start to do things that are not in your best interest. Not enough sleep, not enough eating. All these kind of things. Anyway, next story. Some good news. There's that Essex pub. I can't remember what it's called. That was displaying these racist dolls. It's now been shut down after its suppliers have decided they're going to boycott it. And this is really a good story, and it's a good lesson for us to remember that actually sometimes if you can't get the offender to change, then put pressure on those who support the offenders, those who facilitate it. So there's those of you who don't know this whole story. This pub was being investigated by the police for hate crimes because they've been displaying these gollies, which are racist dolls. And they were saying there's no problem. They've been cited in some magazine saying that, this was a great pub to go by. It has soft toys, blah, 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 blah. And so people came out supporting the pub. People came out against the pub. There was a research that was commissioned. There's a survey for some, I can't remember which university. It might have been Queen's Mary's. It found that 74% of people who were aged 65 years of age and over thought that selling and displaying these gollies was not racist. But in contrast, they found that only 13% of 18 to 24-year-olds felt the same way. So we can see there's an age disparity with this as well, which is it's not uncommon. There's also an ethnic disparity, but there's a group of people who normally conservative who find these disgusting caricatures of us that exaggerate and dehumanize us as cute. But this pub has been closed down. Bernice Riley, who's the woman in the picture, says she blames the police. She says the police meant that the pub became stigmatized by the raid. And so that's the reason why you've got companies like Heineken. And Heineken are one of the companies that are boycotting, saying that, look, we don't want to be associated with you. This is not our values, and we're not providing you with beer. So she's blaming it on the stigmatization caused by the police rather than recognizing that her stinking racist attitude and her refusal to engage when people are telling you that actually this is quite harmful is what caused this. But hey, wrong and strong, right? Talking about wrong and strong, this one was quite sad. This just came out, this story. The actor Richard Dreyfuss, and I spoke about the brilliance of Harry Belafonte. And the reason why I say, I say we had to comment and reflect and celebrate that kind of integrity is because there are many of us who don't have that. Now, you might remember the youthful Richard Dreyfuss from his brilliant performance in the film Jaws, Steven Spielberg's film Jaws. And sometimes you kind of think that the character they play in the film is a character they are in real life, but that's not the case. Richard Dreyfuss has said that these new diversity rules that have come in to make the Oscars, less biased, less racist, let's be honest, make him vomit. And, that's his opinion, it's fine. But we had to be aware that these people and these views exist. You see, he's just complained about the fact that since 2020, or starting in 2024, not since. I mean, I'm not going to say since the Oscars So White movement, there's been push for change. And what the Academy has done, and not the Higher Education Academy, but the Acting Academy have done, it said that starting in 2024, films will be required to meet inclusion standards to be eligible for awards for Best Picture. That's it. That's what they said. That means that they're going to have a certain percentage of actors or crew members from underrepresented or minority ethnic groups. That's what they've said. They've not said that you can't make films the way you're doing it, but if you want to get an award from our organisation, then we need to see that you're being inclusive. And he's just gone on this mega rant. No one should be telling me as an artist that I have to give in to this. He doesn't use political correctness, this morality nonsense, blah blah blah. What minority or majority community can tell me, what to do and to be catered for. It infringes on my rights as an artist. And if someone wants to do blackface, and they can do blackface, and we can't start worrying about hurting people's feelings and rah 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 rah. And he just goes on and on and on. It just makes me want to vomit. That's him. He makes an interesting point. He says that if someone of African heritage wants to play a Jewish person, for example, what's wrong with them doing that? And if a Jewish person wants to play someone who's of African heritage, why shouldn't they be able to do that? And he makes an argument. I mean, I have sympathy with that. Art is art. But I also have complete and 100% support for the idea that for an industry standard award like the Oscars to, for so long, not factor in inclusivity into its award procedure, into its marking schema, has been the epitome of racism, of institutionalized racism. They're not just like a small tin pot company giving Oscar, trinkets out of a garage. They are the industry standard for what the film industry is supposed to look like. And so it's damn right. It's about time that they recognize that we don't give Oscars to people who are engaged in racist practice. There's nothing wrong with that. But Dreyfus feels differently. So I thought I'd share that with you. And I'll give you another related story to that one. Because Netflix has now found itself in a storm as people are making complaints over its decision to depict Cleopatra as an African woman. And you just start to think people have got time on their hands, right? So there's now actually a lawyer who's filed a complaint that accuses, African Queens. I think it's a company that did it for Netflix. It says that Queen Cleopatra of violating media laws and aiming to erase the Egyptian identity. So for them, essentially, they're worried that what's the problem with Cleopatra being identified as an African woman? DNA suggests quite strongly that it should be. The reconstruction suggests that this is the case. It's in Egypt. It's in Africa. This is a situation. But there's an archaeologist from the same region who says that Cleopatra was light-skinned and not black. And that's where we start to hear what they're going on about. Now, Adele James is that actress you can see in the image. She's a British actress who's dual heritage. And, she says, like, what's wrong? I mean, her presence there is a nod to this centuries-long conversation about Cleopatra's ethnic origins. This is a project that's been produced by Jada Pinkett Smith, who's also the producer and narrator. And she's saying that, I want my children to be able to see us on the screen and see us represented. So, I mean, I think goes back to that whole thing with the British Museum where Africa, or Egypt is somehow not seen as being in Africa, where the African history, the African roots of Kemet is being eradicated for political reasons, where the works of people like Sheikh Anta Diop, Diop Ila Benga, is just being ignored. People are just going to have to get used to the fact that African people have a serious lineage that starts in Kemet. Kemet is in Africa. I mean, I don't get it. Well, I do get it, but this is the problem when it comes to representation. I'm going to move on. It's a silly story, but it's an important one just to reflect on. Okay, almost close to the end. I know we've been going on for quite some while. Apologies, but there's quite a lot of stories, so I'm going to try and wrap up in the next few minutes. There's been a report. You've heard us talk about football. I was going to share a story about the racist insults and abuse that's been held at Busaka. But we've dealt with racism in football, so let's take another sport. We talked about cricket. We're going to go to rugby, and there's a new report called, I think it's by Purpose Union, and it finds, surprise, surprise, that there is racism rife in the sector. Now, the report was put together by the Rugby Football Union, the Premiership Rugby, and the Rugby Players Association, and they jointly commissioned it. And they've done this because there were some allegations made by Luther Burrell. He's the brother at the top. I haven't seen these allegations, but apparently it was published in the Daily Mail or something about racism in the industry. And so the report has come out and it says, look, rugby players and coaches have experienced racism at every level in the elite game in England, every single level. They say that in the majority of these instances, that these abuses and these incidents are not one-offs. They're ongoing. They repeatedly keep going on. There have been comments from African women who play in rugby, not in this report, but I've also at the same time said that they've been made to feel like their hair is not acceptable in the sports of rugby. There's an article on the BBC that I've read, which talks about how African women have to use protective styles to protect their hair when they're playing rugby, and often they're made to feel like well, why don't you just kind of like process it and just put some kind of like formaldehyde and expose yourself to cancer to comply. That's not the words they use, but that's what they're asking them to do. Anyway, just as you can expect, Bill Sweeney, the chief executive of the Rugby Football Union, says, we've got an action plan, and our action plan aims to evolve the culture, blah, 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 the sport, blah, 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 blah. Rugby, another sector, another day. Water is still wet. Okay, last section. You are watching the Pan-African Community News Programme, Studio Self, Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu, Sister Oleander, live on YouTube, Facebook. You're free to share. You're free to make comments before we sign off. You're free to let us know what you think. Let us know if you think I'm talking nonsense, whether you agree, whether you have something you want to share with us. We're covering the last 4 weeks, I think, 4 weeks and a little bit more. But normally we do 2 weeks. And I'm going to just give a couple of stories on health before we sign off. And the first story is one that was that would really fall under our community champions, or our, we honor section, which I'm going to bring back with good news stories. But it's really about this sister, Linda Igweke. I hope I pronounced her name right. And she has opened up a discussion about Parkinson's disease. And she has done this using her clout, because she found out that her late father was diagnosed with it some time ago. And when that happened, the family didn't really seek help from others. The stigma, the same way I was talking about mental health, Parkinson is seen in the same way. So the stigma that's associated with Parkinson meant that they didn't actually quite want to talk to anyone. And so as the disease progressed, she became, and her and her mum and their siblings became their father's primary carers. And she's just really honest that their lack of knowledge about the condition meant that they struggled to know where to look for support. Obviously, he passed away. But she's now decided that, look, this situation can't stand. And so she's teamed up, or I say she's teamed up, I don't know if she's still teamed up, but she did team up with a charity, Parkinson's UK, and organised an event called Linda E's Spring Soiree. And the whole point was just to discuss the topic and to raise awareness of it. I hope it's an ongoing discussion. From the article I read, it doesn't seem to be ongoing. But she's trying to raise awareness, and this is important. There's a lot of these conditions, there's already a stigma associated with them, because being unwell or having anything that impacts on your mental faculties is always seen as a taboo topic. But let alone if you start bringing ethnicity into it, it becomes even more difficult to deal with. So we need to talk about Parkinson's. And thank you, sister, for doing this. As a community, I'm sure we know that we are sorry for your loss. The final story I'm going to close with today is a good story. Is one of our community champion stories, and this is that of a young man. I say young man. Actually, I'd have to call him uncle, because he's 60. His name is Jeff Thompson, and it sounds really simple, but he sold his car to fund support for groups affected by prostate cancer. That's all he did. And I mean, it's nice. I take solace in the fact that there are people who are prepared to help others at the cost of it. They shouldn't have to. We pay enough taxes. We've invested enough blood in the soil of this space, enough energy that the services should be there for us. But I think that his story is typical for many of us. I mean, he comes from West Croydon. He now runs these monthly support groups for people affected by prostate cancer, and he's doing it in an effort to raise awareness around the particular illness and also men's mental health. That's what he's focused on. And he did this because in 2018 he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He was fortunate. The same year he was diagnosed, he had surgery. It successfully removed the cancer, and he's been clear now for 5 years. So it's personal. He got it. But after that, he tried to take his life. Or during that process, I should say. Now he's okay. During that process, twice he tried to take his own life, and he's recovered, and he's decided that actually he wants to reach out and he wanted to get in touch with a friend who suffered from the same ailment, but now he's decided he wants to do more, not just his friend, but others who suffer from the same ailment. And so in 2019, he sold his car, and that's what he used to help fund this project, where he runs this monthly support group. It's called Cancer Don't Let It Win, CIC. I mean, it's really simple. I hope he sets up a GoFundMe so people like myself can just drop in a few pounds and keep it going. And others who are interested can drop in a few pounds. But it's a really good story, and it's just a reminder that no matter how bleak things sound, and I know today might seem really bleak. If you're still with us, I mean, we've been on for over an hour and a half. Don't give up hope. Don't ever give up hope. Don't ever succumb to the darkness, despite all the toxicity that's around us. We are a loving people. We are. I don't want to say a resilient people because that's been overused, but there's a song, the only song by Elton John that I ever quote, and it makes me laugh. He's got a song called "We're Still Standing," and every time I hear it, I just can't help but think of us. I think of slavery, I think of colonialism, I think of eugenics, I think of all the things that people have done to us, society, institutions have done to us, and we're still here, we're still standing, and we're standing because there's so many of us who refuse to die, who refuse to let them win, refuse to let them break us, who have love of self, love of life, have compassion for others, who have a vision for a better future, and have somehow not let it make us sick and twisted and become as evil as those that we would oppose, but actually live a righteous life and try and do right by others. And we're still standing. So with that, I'll bring in Sister Oleander, and as ever, I want to thank you for putting up with me for this period of time, and my moans, and being blessed with Sister Oleander being on the other line. You've been a bit quiet today, but that's good. That's fine. I know what it's like. It's bank holiday, isn't it? Weekend, so the trauma of that coronation ritual has probably left a lot of you kind of like a bit exhausted. That's why I didn't watch it. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you. I want to thank Brother Colin as well, and all of you who are involved in providing research for this program. Those legality supporters who continue to donate, and you, our community. Please, if you found this information useful, share it. Just spread it, put it in a group or in a link. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, get others to subscribe. Don't know how long I can keep going on this. We're going to keep doing it though. We will be back 21st of May 2023. I don't know if you want to say anything, Oleander.
Yeah, so Dee says, thanks again, Tunde, another great show. I think they mean Toyin.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate the affirmation for the show. And thank you for logging in and keeping us company. Sister Oleander, anything to say?
No, just it's good to be back, and hopefully we will see you guys the next time, 2 weeks' time. That's right, isn't it? 2 weeks' time. I'll just Okay, great. Yeah. So see you around 2 weeks' time, and stay safe.
Yeah. And as ever, as I always say, please, may the ancestors continue to guide and watch over us. Ashe.
Ashe.